I'm a 28-year-old art teacher from Boston named Maeve. My creative, sensitive nature always made me vulnerable to my mother's cutting words. But nothing prepared me for that family gathering last summer when she stood up and screamed those words that still echo in my mind. Having you here just brings me shame. In that devastating moment, something inside me changed forever, leading me to make a decision that would transform my entire life. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when it mattered most. Growing up in a middle-class Boston neighborhood, I always felt like the odd one out in my family. While most children's artwork was proudly displayed on refrigerators, mine was critically examined by my mother, a successful corporate attorney with expectations higher than our three-story brownstone. Maeve, honestly, couldn't you stay inside the lines? Your cousin Abigail's artwork is always so precise, she would say, comparing my colorful, imaginative drawings to my cousin's more conventional ones. From as early as I can remember, my artistic tendencies were treated as flaws rather than gifts. I would spend hours in my room creating detailed fantasy worlds with crayons and paper, only to have my mother sigh when I proudly presented them. "That's nice, dear. But wouldn't your time be better spent on your multiplication tables? You know you're falling behind in math." My father, a kind but passive high school history teacher, would occasionally slip into my room after these encounters, pat my shoulder and whisper, "I think they're beautiful, Maeve Bear." But he never challenged my mother's dismissals openly, always retreating when her sharp gaze turned in his direction. Then there was my younger brother Jackson, 3 years my junior, but seemingly light years ahead in our mother's estimation. He was the athlete, the straight-A student, the social butterfly who fit perfectly into our mother's vision of success. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became a refrain so common I could predict exactly when it would come, usually after Jackson brought home another perfect test score or sports trophy. By third grade, I had developed a strategy excellence in academics might compensate for my artistic deficiency. I studied until my eyes burned, earned top marks in every subject, and brought home perfect report cards. "Well, at least you're applying yourself somewhere useful," my mother remarked, a faint smile briefly softening her features before she returned to reviewing legal briefs at our kitchen table. The pattern continued through middle school. I became a master of people-pleasing, anticipating my mother's wants before she expressed them, keeping my room immaculate, speaking only when spoken to at her colleague dinners. My anxiety manifested in bitten nails and stomach aches before family gatherings, where I knew I would be compared to cousins, neighbors, friends' children who were excelling in ways my mother valued. High school brought my first small rebellions. I secretly signed up for advanced art classes instead of the pre-law electives my mother suggested. I befriended Zoe and Audrey, creative spirits whose parents encouraged their artistic endeavors. Their homes became sanctuaries where I could be myself, where adults asked to see my sketchbooks, rather than my test scores. My art teacher, Ms. Summers, became my champion, entering my work in contests without telling me. When I won a regional prize in my junior year, she called my parents herself. "Your daughter has extraordinary talent," she told my mother over the phone. "She could qualify for scholarships to top art programs." I still remember my mother's response as she hung up. "That's very nice, but Maeve will be applying to proper universities. This art business is just a hobby." But Ms. Summers had planted a seed of possibility. With her help, I applied to art schools in secret, using my after-school job earnings to pay application fees. When the acceptance letter from Rhode Island School of Design arrived with a substantial scholarship offer, I placed it on my mother's desk with shaking hands. "This is ridiculous," she said, barely glancing at it. "No daughter of mine is wasting her potential on something so impractical." That night my father came to my room after she had gone to bed. "I put aside some money," he whispered. "Not much, but enough to help with books and supplies. You should follow your heart, Maeve." It was the first time he had openly defied her, even if in secret. With that small act of support, I found the courage to stand my ground. I was going to art school with or without my mother's blessing. The day I left for college, she didn't come out of her home office to say goodbye. My father hugged me tightly at the door, slipping an extra $100 into my hand. "Make something beautiful," he said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. As our car pulled away, I looked back at my childhood home, seeing my mother watching from her office window, her expression unreadable. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning of a long journey toward finding my voice and ultimately making the choice that would change everything. College became my first taste of freedom, a world where creativity wasn't just tolerated, but celebrated. The RISD campus buzzed with energy that felt like pure oxygen after years of holding my breath at home. "Your use of color is extraordinary," my first-year professor commented during a critique, pointing to aspects of my work no one had ever noticed before. "You have a unique perspective, Maeve. Don't lose that." For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood the need to create as fundamental rather than frivolous. My roommate Jasmine, a fiber arts major from California, would stay up late with me, both of us working under desk lamps, sharing ideas and encouragement. "You know what I love about your work," she said one night as I struggled with a particularly challenging assignment. "You paint like you're telling secrets. There's always something hidden beneath the surface." I hadn't realized how much I had buried parts of myself until I began to uncover them through my art. Landscapes became expressions of emotional terrain. Portraits revealed inner worlds, rather than just physical likenesses. In my sophomore year, my work was selected for the Student Gallery, a small triumph I shyly shared with my father during our weekly phone calls. "I wish I could see it," he said, genuine pride in his voice. "Maybe I could drive up next weekend." He came alone, of course. My mother was too busy with an important case, her standard excuse for avoiding my art world. But seeing my father standing in the gallery, moving slowly from piece to piece with growing wonder on his face, meant everything. It was during junior year that I met Ethan in a mixed media workshop. Tall, with unruly dark hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose, he approached art with both technical precision and wild imagination. He was the first to arrive at the studio each morning and the last to leave. "That shadow technique is incredible," he said, stopping by my workspace one afternoon. "Would you mind showing me how you achieved that effect?" Our conversation flowed from art techniques to favorite museums to childhood dreams, extending long after class ended. We walked campus until sunset, discovering shared loves of obscure films, spicy food, and thunderstorms. Unlike previous relationships where I had carefully hidden my family dynamics with Ethan, I found myself sharing the truth about my mother's disapproval, my father's quiet support, the constant feeling of being measured and found wanting. "That must have been incredibly painful," he said, without trying to offer solutions or silver linings. "But look at what you've created from that pain. Your work has such depth because of what you've experienced, not in spite of it." His understanding gave me permission to stop apologizing for my choices. When my mother called to remind me that it wasn't too late to transfer to a business program, I finally found the courage to respond directly. "I'm thriving here, Mom. My work is getting noticed. This is where I belong." Her silence spoke volumes, but for once I didn't fill it with apologies. Graduation arrived with both triumph and trepidation. While most of my classmates had family celebrations, mine was subdued. My mother attended the ceremony, but sat stiffly offering a brief congratulations before heading back to Boston immediately after. My father lingered longer, taking me and Ethan to dinner, asking thoughtful questions about our post-graduation plans. Finding work as an artist proved challenging, as my mother had always predicted. But rather than admitting defeat, I persevered, applying for teaching positions that would allow me to stay connected to art while paying my bills. When I landed a job teaching art at Oak Ridge Elementary School, Ethan celebrated with me as though I'd been awarded a prestigious gallery show. "You're going to inspire so many kids," he said, twirling me around our tiny apartment. "Just think of the impact you'll have." My mother's response was predictably dampening. Teaching finger painting to children, all that education for this. But something had shifted in me. Her words still stung, but they no longer defined my worth. My classroom became my sanctuary filled with children eager to explore creativity without judgment. I hung their artwork, proudly praised their unique expressions, and vowed never to make any child feel their artistic voice wasn't valuable. Ethan and I found a small apartment together, turning the spare bedroom into a shared studio space. We established routines that nurtured both our relationship and our creative practices. Sunday mornings were spent sketching at local cafes. Friday evenings were reserved for gallery openings and connecting with other artists. My contact with my parents dwindled to monthly phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. Each interaction with my mother left me drained, her criticism now extending to my teaching career, my apartment, even my relationship with Ethan. He's an artist, too. So neither of you has a proper career plan, she commented during one Thanksgiving dinner. But away from her influence, I was flourishing. My students adored our art classes, parents commented on their children's growing confidence, and I even began selling small pieces at local craft fairs. Ethan's graphic design work was gaining recognition, leading to more stable freelance opportunities. On our third anniversary, after a day spent hiking and sketching in the woods north of Boston, Ethan knelt beside a small stream and presented a ring he had designed himself, a delicate silver band with a small moonstone. "You've taught me to see beauty in unexpected places," he said, his voice catching. "Will you marry me, Maeve?" Joy bubbled up inside me as I said yes, but it was quickly followed by anxiety. A wedding meant family. Family meant my mother. My mother meant judgment, criticism, and potential humiliation. "We could elope," I suggested that evening as we discussed plans. Ethan took my hands in his. "We could, but I think you'd regret not having your father there, and running away might feel like letting her win." He was right, of course. The question wasn't whether to have a wedding, but how to navigate having one without allowing my mother's disapproval to overshadow our happiness. What I didn't realize was that before we could even begin planning a family gathering would bring everything to a breaking point and force me to make the choice I had been avoiding for years. My grandfather's 80th birthday celebration was scheduled for the first weekend in June, bringing together extended family from across the country. The event was to be held at my Aunt Catherine's spacious home in Connecticut, with its sweeping lawn and gardens in full bloom. "We have to go," I told Ethan, twisting my engagement ring nervously. "Grandpa Marshall has always been supportive of me. Plus, it might be a good opportunity to announce our engagement to everyone at once." Ethan squeezed my hand. "I'll be right beside you the whole time." The drive to Connecticut was beautiful but tense. I rehearsed potential conversations in my head, planning diplomatic responses to inevitable questions about my career and future plans. "Remember, we're celebrating your grandfather," Ethan reminded me as we pulled into my aunt's driveway. "Try to focus on him and not worry about your mother." Aunt Catherine greeted us with warm hugs, ushering us into the backyard where tables had been arranged under white canopies. My cousins Leah and Thomas waved us over, making space at their table. "The art teacher arrives," Thomas said with a genuine smile. "My kids still have the clay ornaments you helped them make last Christmas." For the first hour, everything was pleasant. I caught up with relatives I rarely saw, introduced Ethan to family members who seemed genuinely interested in our lives and work. My father found moments to check in with me, his eyes crinkling with happiness to see me so comfortable with Ethan. My mother kept her distance, initially engaged in conversation with her sisters and their husbands about property values and investment strategies. I allowed myself to relax, slightly enjoying the perfect early summer day and my grandfather's obvious delight in having his family gathered around him. After lunch, the subtle digs began. My mother materialized at our table just as my cousin Leah was admiring my ring. "Handmade, I assume," my mother said, glancing at the moonstone. "I suppose that's appropriate for your situation." I felt Ethan stiffen beside me, but gave him a small shake of my head. This was typical mother behavior, nothing I couldn't handle. As the afternoon progressed, her comments grew more frequent and pointed. "Maeve tells me you're a graphic designer," she said to Ethan during cake service. "Is that providing stable income yet, or are you still doing the starving artist routine?" "Actually, I just landed a contract with a major publishing house," Ethan replied politely. And Maeve's school just approved funding for an expanded arts program under her direction. My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. How nice that you found a little niche for yourselves. By late afternoon, I had developed a persistent headache from the tension of anticipating her next comment. When Grandfather Marshall asked everyone to gather for a family photo, I nearly declined, but the thought of disappointing him was worse than enduring more time under my mother's critical gaze. As we arranged ourselves on the lawn, my Aunt Catherine asked about wedding plans, not realizing that many relatives hadn't yet heard our news. "Wedding?" my Uncle David asked. "Who's getting married?" All eyes turned to us. Ethan slipped his arm around my waist supportively. "Ethan and I are engaged," I confirmed, trying to sound confident despite feeling my mother's stare burning into me. Congratulations erupted from all sides. My grandfather made his way over to embrace me, whispering, "He's a good man, Maeve. I'm so happy for you." Then my mother's voice cut through the celebratory chatter. "Engaged. You didn't think to discuss this with your father and me first." The conversations around us quieted. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "Mom, I'm 28 years old. I don't need permission to get engaged." She gave a short, dismissive laugh that made my stomach clench. "Of course not. You've never needed our input on your life choices, have you? Art school teaching, finger painting, and now marrying another artist with no stable career prospects." The silence around us deepened. My father stepped forward. "Helen, this isn't the time or place." But something had snapped inside her. Years of disapproval condensed into this moment as her voice rose. "It's never the time or place, is it, Richard? That's why she continues making these ridiculous decisions. No one ever tells her the truth." I felt myself shrinking under her words, a lifetime habit of making myself smaller in the face of her anger. But Ethan's steady presence beside me kept me grounded. "Mom, please stop," I said quietly. "We're celebrating Grandpa's birthday." She turned to the gathered family, gesturing toward me with a sweeping hand. "Do you all see what I've had to deal with? The constant defiance, the impractical choices, the complete disregard for everything we've tried to provide." My Aunt Catherine stepped forward. "Helen, the children are getting upset. Let's take this inside." "No." My mother's voice cracked like a whip. I've spent years watching her throw away every opportunity. Art school instead of a real degree, teaching instead of a career, and now this engagement to someone equally directionless. She turned back to me, her face flushed with anger. "Having you here just brings me shame. Do you understand that every family gathering, every conversation with friends, every holiday I have to explain away your choices?" The words hit me like physical blows. I heard gasps from relatives, saw my young cousins being hurried away by their parents. My father stood frozen, his face ashen. Ethan's arm tightened protectively around me. But strangely, in that horrible moment, something crystallized inside me. The pain was excruciating, yes, but with it came clarity. This wasn't about my choices. It had never been about my choices. This was about her inability to see me as a separate person with my own valid path. I straightened my spine and met her gaze directly. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom," I said, my voice steady, despite the tears threatening to spill. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval. I'm done now." I turned to my grandfather. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I love you, but we need to leave." My grandfather, his face lined with concern and love, took my hands in his weathered ones. "You have nothing to apologize for, my dear. Nothing at all." To my surprise, he turned to my mother. "Helen, I raised you better than this." I didn't wait to hear her response. With Ethan beside me, I walked steadily through the stunned family members, past the festive decorations, and to our car. The silence between us as we drove away was heavy with unspoken thoughts and the enormity of what had just occurred. My mother's words echoed in my head. "Having you here just brings me shame." But instead of crushing me completely, they had somehow broken the last chain tethering me to her approval. In that public humiliation, a decision was forming, one that would ultimately change everything. The drive home from Connecticut was silent, except for the occasional reassuring touch from Ethan. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur as my mind replayed my mother's words on endless loop. Having you here just brings me shame. 28 years of seeking approval erased in a single devastating sentence. When we reached our apartment, I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects as if to confirm they were real. Ethan made tea I didn't drink and sat beside me on our sofa, his presence an anchor in my emotional storm. "Do you want to talk about it?" he finally asked. "Not yet," I whispered. "I'm afraid if I start, I'll never stop." That night I curled against him in bed, finally letting the tears come until our sheets were damp and my throat was raw. He held me without trying to fix anything, understanding that some pain must simply be felt. The next morning, my phone showed 7 missed calls from my father and a text that read, "Please call when you can. I'm so sorry." I set the phone aside, unable to face even his gentle voice yet. But by mid-afternoon, the first call came from an unexpected source. "Maeve, it's Aunt Catherine. I just wanted to check on you, sweetheart." Her warm concern broke through my numbness. "I'm still processing," I admitted. "What your mother said was unforgivable," she stated firmly. Everyone there was shocked. "No one agrees with her, not a single person." Similar calls followed. Cousin Leah, who confessed she'd always admired my courage to pursue art. Uncle David, who awkwardly but sincerely expressed his support. Even my teenage cousins sent supportive text messages. Most surprising was the call from my grandfather. "Maeve." His gravelly voice was soft with emotion. "I want you to know something. Your grandmother, God rest her soul, was an artist too. Your mother grew up watching her struggle for recognition. I think perhaps she's afraid for you, but fear is no excuse for cruelty." 3 days after the incident, my father finally appeared at our door, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Can we talk?" he asked, his eyes pleading. I let him in, Ethan tactfully retreating to our bedroom to give us privacy. "Your mother didn't mean what she said." He began, the familiar pattern of excuses ready on his lips. "She was upset about work stress, and the engagement news caught her off guard." I raised my hand to stop him. "Dad, she meant every word. She's been saying versions of it my entire life, just never so publicly." His shoulders slumped. "Maeve, she loves you. She just has trouble showing it." "That's not love," I said quietly. "Love doesn't make someone feel worthless for being who they are." He had no response to that, just sat twisting his wedding ring, caught, as always, between his wife and daughter. "She won't apologize, will she?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She says everyone is overreacting, that families have disagreements all the time." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "Then I need to take care of myself now." The most unexpected alliance formed when my brother Jackson called the following evening. "What Mom did was wrong," he said without preamble. "I've been thinking about it, and I've realized she's done this to you our whole lives. I just never saw it clearly before because you were the golden child." I finished for him. "Yeah," he admitted, "and I'm sorry I never stood up for you." His acknowledgement was a balm to wounds I hadn't even recognized. "It wasn't your job to protect me, Jackson. We were kids." "Well, I'm not a kid anymore," he said firmly. "And I want you to know I'm on your side." Throughout these conversations, Ethan remained my steadfast support, but I could see his concern growing as I moved through my days in a fog, barely eating, calling in sick to work, staring at blank canvases in our home studio. "Maybe you should talk to someone professional," he suggested gently one evening a week after the incident. "This is a lot to process on your own." I agreed, too emotionally exhausted to argue. The therapist, Dr. Lena Walsh, had a warm office with art on the walls that I recognized as created by her clients. During our first session, I recounted the family gathering incident, then found myself unspooling the entire history of my relationship with my mother. "What I keep coming back to," I told Dr. Walsh, "is how unsurprised I was by what she said. Hurt, yes. Humiliated, absolutely. But not shocked. It's like I always knew that's how she felt about me." Dr. Walsh nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes a traumatic event isn't creating a new wound so much as exposing one that's been there all along. Over the next few sessions, patterns emerged. My people-pleasing tendencies, the anxiety that spiked before any family interaction, the way I would mentally rehearse conversations with my mother, always anticipating criticism. What you're describing, Dr. Walsh explained, is a lifetime of conditional love. Your worth was tied to meeting expectations rather than being accepted for who you are. The revelation wasn't new exactly, but hearing it named so precisely brought clarity. So what do I do now? I asked. That depends on what you want. Some people find ways to maintain relationships with difficult parents by establishing firm boundaries. Others determine that distance is necessary for their well-being. I thought about this during the drive home, the question turning over in my mind. What did I want? For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a future without my mother's approval as the benchmark of success. That evening, I opened my sketchbook for the first time since the incident and began to draw. Not polished artwork, but raw emotional imagery, cages with open doors, chains broken, mid-link birds in flight. When Ethan returned from his late meeting, he found me surrounded by dozens of sketches, tear-stained but breathing easier than I had in weeks. I need to write her a letter, I said. Not for her, but for me. It took 3 days to craft every word, considered carefully. I explained how her words and actions had affected me throughout my life. I described the person I had become despite not because of her influence. And finally, I stated my decision: no contact until she could acknowledge the harm she had caused and demonstrate genuine change. I still love you, Mom, I wrote in closing. But I love myself too much now to accept your version of me. Sealing the letter felt both terrifying and liberating. I drove alone to mail it, standing at the post office box for long minutes before finally letting it slip from my fingers. As I walked back to my car, I felt something shift inside me, fear and liberation intertwined as I took the first step toward reclaiming my life. What about table settings? Asked Audrey, my oldest friend from high school, who had enthusiastically volunteered to help with wedding planning. I found these beautiful handmade ceramic plates from an artist in Vermont. We were sitting in our apartment's small dining area, surrounded by wedding magazines and sample fabrics. 3 months had passed since I'd mailed my letter to my mother, and life had acquired a new rhythm, one without the constant background noise of seeking her approval. They're gorgeous, I agreed, running my fingers over the sample plate with its delicate blue glaze. And supporting another artist feels right. Ethan leaned over my shoulder to look. Perfect. And they'll photograph beautifully with the wildflower centerpieces. The wedding was taking shape as a true reflection of us: artistic, intimate, meaningful. We had chosen a small art gallery for the ceremony and reception, with plans to display our work alongside pieces from my students and artist friends. To my surprise, planning without my mother's input wasn't the disaster she would have predicted. Instead, each decision felt authentic, unburdened by concerns about what would look appropriate or successful to outside observers. More surprising still was the enthusiastic response from extended family. Aunt Catherine called regularly to offer help. My cousins organized a weekend trip to help me find a dress. Even relatives I'd barely known growing up reached out with offers of support and confirmation they would attend. Have you heard anything from your mom? Audrey asked, carefully arranging color swatches for the bridesmaid dresses. I shook my head. Not directly. Dad says she read my letter but feels I'm being dramatic about the whole thing. What my father couldn't articulate, but I had come to understand, was that my mother's silence was her response. She had always expected me to bend to return, seeking reconciliation on her terms. My boundary setting had disrupted this pattern, leaving her without a script. And you're okay with her not being there? Audrey pressed gently. I considered this honestly. I'm sad about what could have been, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my self-respect to have her there under false pretenses. My father's position remained difficult. During our weekly phone calls, he avoided discussing my mother directly, instead focusing on practical matters like his contribution to wedding costs. "I'll be there, Maeve Bear," he promised during one such call. "No matter what." I heard the unspoken message he would come alone if necessary. It was a small act of courage for him, one I appreciated, even as I wished he could find more of that courage in his daily life with my mother. The most unexpected support came from my brother Jackson, who called one evening with a surprising offer. "So I know this is traditionally a dad thing, but would you want me to stand with you? Kind of as your man of honor, or whatever you want to call it." Tears sprang to my eyes. "You'd do that." "Of course," he said simply. "You're my sister, and I'm proud of you, Maeve." I should have said that more often growing up. My therapy sessions with Dr. Walsh continued now, focused less on the immediate trauma and more on rebuilding my self-trust. I began recognizing patterns in how I related to others. The reflexive apologies, the assumption that my needs were less important, the tendency to shrink myself to avoid criticism. These were survival mechanisms, Dr. Walsh explained. They helped you navigate a difficult relationship, but you don't need them anymore. You can choose different ways of being in the world now. This new awareness spilled into my teaching. I found myself creating a simple workshop for my students about healthy boundaries, translating complex emotional concepts into age-appropriate art projects. "Today we're going to create personal shields," I told my third grade class. "What are things you want to protect about yourself? What makes you special that no one has the right to criticize?" Watching these young children proudly depict their unique qualities, sensitivity, creativity, even their weird interests, healed something in me. I was giving them permission I had never received, and in doing so, retroactively giving it to my younger self. As the wedding approached, Ethan's family became an unexpected source of comfort. His parents, both educators with a deep appreciation for the arts, welcomed me with genuine warmth. "We're so happy Ethan found someone who shares his creative spirit," his mother told me during a Sunday dinner at their home. "All we've ever wanted was for him to be true to himself and find joy in his work." The simple acceptance in her statement brought tears to my eyes. This was what parental love could look like, celebrating who your child actually was, not who you wanted them to be. Our wedding day arrived with perfect early autumn weather, sunlight streaming through the gallery windows and illuminating the artwork we had carefully selected. My dress, a flowing creation in ivory with subtle blue embroidery, felt like wearing a cloud. My father arrived early, hugging me tightly before saying, "You look beautiful, Maeve. Truly yourself." I searched his face for signs of sadness that my mother wasn't there, but found only pride and love. Jackson stood beside me throughout the preparations, surprisingly competent at helping with last-minute details and keeping me calm. "Mom's missing something amazing by not being here," he whispered as we prepared to enter the gallery. "But that's her loss, not yours." Walking into the space filled with loved ones who had chosen to celebrate us exactly as we were felt like a victory. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with readings from favorite poems and music performed by artist friends. When Ethan and I exchanged the rings we had designed for each other, I felt completely present in the moment, unburdened by thoughts of who wasn't there or what they might think. The reception flowed with the same authentic energy, tables arranged informally throughout the gallery, encouraging guests to mingle and appreciate the artwork between courses. Children from my classes had created a special installation of paper flowers and wishes for our future displayed prominently near the entrance. As evening fell, fairy lights illuminated the gallery's small garden where we danced our first dance as a married couple. Looking into Ethan's eyes, I felt a profound sense of peace. "Happy?" he asked, his arms secure around me. "Complete?" I answered truthfully. That night marked not just our beginning as a married couple, but my beginning as a woman who had found her way back to herself. The honeymoon that followed, 2 weeks in a rustic cabin in the Maine woods where we hiked, sketched and reconnected with our creative practices, felt like a true fresh start. Returning to teaching afterward, I brought a new energy and perspective to my classroom. My students sensed the change, responding with even greater enthusiasm to projects that encouraged their authentic expression. Ms. Maeve, one of my second graders, asked, during a self-portrait exercise, How do you draw yourself when you feel two different ways inside? I knelt beside her desk. That's a beautiful question. Art lets us show parts of ourselves that might be hard to explain with words. Maybe you could use different colors for different feelings, or divide your portrait to show both sides. Her face lit up with understanding, and I realized I was finally becoming the teacher I had always wanted to be, one who validated children's emotional complexity rather than simplifying it. The months following our wedding brought a new sense of stability and purpose. Ethan's design business was growing steadily, and my expanded art program at school was receiving recognition from the district. We began saving for a small house, dreaming of a dedicated studio space and garden. What I couldn't have anticipated was how this newfound peace would be tested by an unexpected confrontation that would ultimately solidify the choice I had made to prioritize my own well-being. 6 months after our wedding, winter had settled over Boston, transforming the city with a pristine blanket of snow. My classroom walls were covered with my students' interpretations of winter landscapes, vibrant impressions of a world transformed by ice and light. I was straightening up after the last class of the day, my mind already shifting to evening plans with Ethan, when a familiar figure appeared in my classroom doorway. My mother. She stood there in her tailored charcoal coat, hair perfectly styled, looking simultaneously out of place among the children's artwork and impossibly imposing. My heart rate doubled instantly. "Mom," I managed, setting down the paintbrushes I'd been collecting. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside, glancing around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your father mentioned you'd expanded your program. I was in the neighborhood for a deposition and thought I'd see for myself." The careful neutrality in her voice did nothing to calm my racing pulse. 6 months of silence, and now she appeared without warning in my classroom, my safe space. "The school requires visitors to check in at the office," I said, hearing the defensive edge in my voice. I did. She held up a visitor badge. "Your principal seemed quite impressed with your work here." A few lingering students gathered their backpacks, watching our interaction with undisguised curiosity. I maintained a professional smile until the last child left, then turned back to my unexpected visitor. "You could have called first," I said, continuing to clean up to give my shaking hands something to do. My mother removed her gloves deliberately. "Would you have agreed to see me?" The direct question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I answered honestly. She nodded as though this confirmed something. "Your classroom is colorful." Coming from her, this was neither compliment nor criticism, simply observation. I waited, remembering Dr. Walsh's advice about not rushing to fill uncomfortable silences. "I may have overreacted at your grandfather's birthday," she finally said, examining a clay sculpture on my desk rather than looking at me. "It was a stressful time at the firm, and the surprise announcement of your engagement." I felt a familiar pattern activating her, minimizing her behavior, offering circumstances rather than responsibility, expecting me to accept this as sufficient apology. 6 months ago, I might have. "That wasn't an overreaction, Mom," I said quietly but firmly. "It was a public humiliation consistent with how you've treated me my entire life." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "That's extremely unfair, Maeve. I've always wanted what's best for you." "What you thought was best," I corrected. "Not what actually made me happy or fulfilled." The fluorescent classroom lights seemed suddenly harsh, illuminating the growing tension between us. My mother's carefully composed expression began to crack. "So I'm a terrible mother because I wanted security and success for my daughter, instead of watching her struggle in an unreliable field." I took a deep breath, centering myself. "This isn't about career choices. It's about the fact that you've never been able to see me for who I actually am. You created a version of me in your mind, and whenever the real me didn't match that image, you responded with disappointment and criticism." To my surprise, I wasn't shouting or crying. My voice remained steady, my thoughts clear. The months of therapy had given me language for experiences I had previously only felt. "That's ridiculous," she said, but with less conviction. "Every parent has hopes for their children." "Hopes, yes. not demands, not conditional love. My mother's cheeks flushed. I have always loved you, Maeve. In your way, perhaps, I acknowledged. But it never felt like love to me. It felt like a constant evaluation I was failing. Her anger resurfaced familiar territory for both of us. So now you're the expert on parenting on love. Because you've married a graphic designer and teach finger painting to second graders. There it was. The dismissal, the belittling. But instead of shrinking from it, I recognized it for what it was, her defense mechanism, her inability to face hard truths about our relationship. I'm an expert on how your words and actions made me feel, I said simply. For the first time in my life, I'm standing in my truth instead of trying to contort myself to fit your expectations. I gestured to the classroom around us. This isn't finger painting, Mom. This is giving children tools to express themselves, to process their emotions, to see the world in new ways. I'm good at it. I make a difference in their lives. And I'm happy, truly happy, for maybe the first time. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a momentary glimpse of uncertainty. I continued, years of unspoken feelings finding voice. Do you know what I remember from childhood? The time you tore up my drawing because I was late for dinner? The time you called my portrait of Grandma amateurish at a family gathering? The college acceptance letter you threw in the trash? She shook her head. You're exaggerating. Those were minor incidents. They weren't minor to me, I said. They were moments when you made it absolutely clear that my passion, my very self, was unacceptable to you. My mother's perfectly manicured hand gripped the back of a student chair. And your father, I suppose, was the perfect parent. Dad was kind but complicit, I acknowledged. He protected me in small ways, but never challenged your fundamental approach. That's on him. We stood in silence for a long moment, decades of misunderstanding and hurt suspended between us. Finally, my mother picked up her purse. I see you've made up your mind about me, she said, her voice tight. Perhaps this was a mistake. As she turned to leave, I felt not the crushing disappointment I would have expected, but a surprising sense of strength. Mom, I called after her. She paused at the door. I haven't made up my mind about anything. I've simply decided I won't accept treatment that diminishes me. If you ever want to have a real conversation about our relationship, one where you truly listen, I'd be open to that. She didn't respond, just continued through the door and down the hallway, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. I stood in my empty classroom, surrounded by the vibrant artwork of children who were learning what had taken me decades to understand, that their unique expression had inherent value. Instead of the emotional collapse I might have expected after such a confrontation, I felt oddly peaceful. I had spoken my truth without being cruel, maintained my boundary without building a wall. The outcome wasn't what I might have hoped for, but the process itself was healing. That evening, as Ethan and I prepared dinner together, I recounted the encounter. Are you okay? He asked, his concern evident. Strangely, yes, I replied. It wasn't the reconciliation Hallmark would script, but it felt authentic. For once, I didn't pretend or minimize or apologize for existing. Later that night, my phone rang, my father's number. Your mother came home upset, he said without preamble. She wouldn't tell me exactly what happened, but she was crying, Maeve. Actually crying. I had never known my mother to cry. The image was so foreign, I couldn't quite process it. I'm sorry she's upset, I said sincerely. But I only spoke the truth about how her treatment has affected me. My father was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's what she needed to hear. It wasn't a declaration of support exactly, but it was an acknowledgement that perhaps change was necessary. As I hung up, I wondered if this difficult confrontation might actually be the first tiny seed of possible future healing. Not a fairy tale reconciliation, not an erasure of past harm, but a small crack in the fortress of denial my mother had built around herself. I wouldn't count on it, my newfound peace couldn't depend on her transformation. But for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that someday we might find a new way to know each other. 1 year later, spring sunshine filtered through the windows of the Harborview Gallery, illuminating my collection of paintings. Reflections, Family Identity and Healing, read the exhibition banner, my name displayed prominently beneath it. After months of late nights painting after the school hours, my first solo show had come to fruition. "Ms. Maeve, I found the one with the birdcage," called out Joey, one of my third-grade students, who had come with his parents. Several of my students darted between the gallery visitors' scavenger hunt sheets in hand, finding symbols I had hidden throughout my work. The exhibition space hummed with conversation and movement. Former classmates from RISD, colleagues from school friends who had supported me through the tumultuous past year, y'all had come to celebrate this milestone. Ethan moved through the crowd, photographer in tow, documenting the evening with obvious pride. My self-portrait series formed the centerpiece of the exhibition, 7 large canvases, exploring themes of silencing awakening boundaries and ultimately self-acceptance. They weren't literal representations, but emotional landscapes using color and form to express what words often couldn't. "These are extraordinary, Maeve," said Dr. Walsh, who had accepted my invitation to attend. "I see so much growth here." "I couldn't have created them without our work together," I acknowledged. "You helped me find language for experiences I could only express visually before." As I guided a group of gallery patrons through the exhibition, explaining my artistic process, I spotted 2 familiar figures entering the space. My father and Jackson, both looking slightly out of place, but determined to be there. "We wouldn't miss this," my father said, embracing me. "It's incredible, Maeve Bear. Mom sent this for you." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card store-bought with a generic congratulatory message. Beneath the printed text was a single handwritten line: "Your grandfather would have been proud." No signature, just those 6 words, acknowledging my achievement without quite claiming pride herself. It wasn't the apology I'd once craved, but it was something an acknowledgement of my accomplishment on my own terms. I tucked the card away, neither dismissing its significance nor allowing it to overshadow the evening. "She's trying in her way," my father said quietly. "The fact that she's not here is actually growth for her, recognizing this is your moment, not an opportunity for conflict." Jackson rolled his eyes slightly. "Low bar, Dad. But yeah, baby steps." The relationship with my mother had evolved into something I never would have imagined, a careful distance maintained through occasional brief phone calls and holiday cards, with my father acting as primary family connection. It wasn't warm, but it was honest, and that honesty was worth more than false harmony. My relationship with my father had deepened as he navigated his own complex position. He had begun seeing a therapist himself, tentatively exploring his role in our family dynamics. Jackson had become a true ally, our adult relationship far stronger than our childhood one had been. "Attention, everyone." Ethan's voice rang out over the gallery chatter. "First, I want to thank you all for coming to support Maeve's incredible work. As her husband, I've had the privilege of watching these pieces evolve from concept to completion, and I can tell you they represent not just artistic talent, but profound personal courage." He beckoned me to join him. As I moved through the crowd, I was struck by how different this felt from past moments of public attention, no anxiety knotting my stomach, no mental rehearsal of how to make myself acceptable. I simply walked forward as my self-artist and teacher loved for who I was. "Maeve and I actually have another announcement to make tonight," Ethan continued when I reached his side, his arm wrapping around my waist. "In about 7 months, we'll be welcoming a new little artist into our family." Cheers erupted as hands instinctively moved to my still flat stomach. We had only confirmed the pregnancy 2 weeks earlier and had debated whether to share the news at the exhibition. Ultimately, it felt right to announce our growing family in this space filled with art and supporters who had helped me reclaim my identity. Later, as guests began to depart with exhibition catalogs in hand, I found a quiet moment with Ethan in the corner of the gallery. "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" he asked both of us, knowing the question encompassed far more than just the exhibition. "Beyond happy," I replied. "I keep thinking about what I'm going to tell our child someday about family, about standing up for yourself, about making art from pain." The journey from that devastating moment at my grandfather's birthday to this night of celebration hadn't been linear or simple. There had been difficult days, moments of doubt, occasional backsliding into old patterns of people-pleasing and self-doubt. But through therapy, supportive relationships, and my own growing resilience, I had constructed a life aligned with my authentic self. My commitment to breaking the cycle of criticism had led me to join a support group for adults with difficult parent relationships. There, I met Shannon and Amara, two women who had become close friends and allies in the ongoing work of healing. The thing I've learned, I told my therapy group in a recent session, is that forgiveness and reconciliation aren't necessarily the same thing. I can release the anger without pretending the harm didn't happen. This philosophy guided my approach to my mother, allowing me to acknowledge her card without abandoning my boundaries. It informed my teaching, helping me create a classroom where students felt truly seen and valued. And now it would shape my approach to parenthood, that most profound responsibility. As the gallery emptied, I stood before my final self-portrait, a figure emerging from shadowy blues and purples into vibrant yellows and oranges, arms outstretched toward a horizon filled with light. "This is my favorite," said my father, who had lingered behind as Jackson helped load unsold pieces into Ethan's van. "It feels like hope." "It is," I confirmed, "but not the naive kind. It's hope built on truth, on seeing clearly." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Your mother may never be able to give you what you needed, Maeve. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for my part in it, too." "I know, Dad." I squeezed his hand. "But I found it elsewhere and created it for myself. That's the real victory." As we locked up the gallery that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From that moment of public humiliation, "Having you here just brings me shame," to this night of public celebration. The words that were meant to diminish me had instead become the catalyst for my transformation. Standing up for myself in that painful moment had changed everything: my relationship with my parents, yes, but more importantly, my relationship with myself. I had discovered that choosing your own well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. That boundaries aren't walls, they're the foundation upon which healthy connections can be built. That speaking your truth, even when it's difficult, creates the possibility for authentic healing. As I look toward the future, now preparing to welcome a child into this imperfect world, I carry these lessons close. I will make my own mistakes as a parent, certainly, but they won't include making my child feel that who they are is fundamentally wrong or insufficient. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your well-being, or found yourself transformed by standing up in a moment that mattered? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's sometimes the bravest, most necessary thing you can do. Thank you for witnessing my story, and remember, your authentic self is always worthy of protection and celebration.